My name is Sloan Mercer, and I'm 34 years old. 2 months ago, my boyfriend looked me in the eye across my living room and told me not to embarrass him. He said it the way you'd talk about parking instructions or the dress code, calm, efficient, like he'd practiced it enough times that it stopped sounding cruel in his head and started sounding reasonable. Just please, Brandon said, straightening his cufflinks in the reflection of my TV. Try not to make it weird tonight, okay? These people are way above your level. I remember the way those words hung in the air, heavy and ridiculous at the same time. Above your level. Like we were talking about a video game, not my entire sense of worth. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I fiddled with the clasp on my necklace and watched him check his hair one more time, the way he always did before important nights. Brandon Cole worked in corporate communications for a fast-growing tech company. His job was to smooth things over, spin bad news into exciting pivots, and make nervous executives sound human on stage. He was good at it. He knew how to perform. We'd been together for 18 months. Long enough for our families to know each other's names, for some drawers to get unofficially shared, for people to start asking when we were moving in together. Long enough for me to believe that, whatever our differences, he respected me. He'd grown up with country club summers, prep schools, and a mother who called his boss darling at fundraisers. I'd grown up in a small Midwestern town where my dad patched the roof himself and my mom taught third grade. I didn't resent his background. If anything, I used to find it a little charming and a little foreign. We joked about it, or I thought we did. I worked my way through a state university, then slowly built a career as an environmental sustainability consultant. My clients were companies trying to reduce their carbon footprint, improve ESG compliance, or at least pretend to, without breaking the law. It wasn't flashy. People's eyes glazed over when I said life cycle assessment at parties. But I was good at it, and in my quiet corner of the world, my name meant something. Brandon knew what I did. He just never seemed all that interested in the details. At his work events, I was Sloan. She does environmental stuff. Before he pivoted the conversation back to whoever had the biggest title in the circle, I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there because I loved him. The night everything shifted was a Saturday in early September. Brandon had finally been invited to a dinner party at the home of Graham and Elise Whitaker. The Whitakers were a big deal in his world. Graham was a venture capitalist with a focus on innovative tech solutions. Elise sat on the boards of 3 nonprofits and was the kind of woman who could raise $1 million over brunch. They hosted selective gatherings at their estate just outside the city. Invitations were whispered about more than posted. Brandon had been angling for an invite for months, maybe years. When the creamy envelope with their monogram showed up in his mailbox, he'd practically vibrated with excitement. "This is it," he'd said, waving it in front of me. "This is the room I need to be in." He spent the next week obsessing over it. New suit, new tie, haircut. He booked a detailing for his car even though we had valet. He asked me 3 separate times what I was planning to wear. "I'll figure it out," I said each time. Apparently that was the wrong answer. The day of the dinner, I chose a simple black dress that fit well, a blazer that made me feel like myself, and low heels I could stand in for hours. Professional, clean, understated. I'd worn something similar to conferences where executives twice my age took notes while I spoke. When I stepped out of the bedroom, Brandon looked me up and down with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not admiration, not even neutrality. Disappointment, edged with something like resignation. "That's what you're wearing?" he asked. I froze for half a second, suddenly aware of every inch of fabric on my body. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Is there a problem with it?" He hesitated, then forced a strained smile. "No, it's fine. It's just, never mind." The never mind felt like a small, sharp thing dropped between us. We left my apartment and got into his car. He insisted on driving because he knew the way. Translation: he didn't trust my parallel parking near rich people. For the first 10 minutes, the music filled the silence. Brandon tapped the steering wheel in time with the beat, eyes flicking between the road and the navigation. Then he turned the volume down. "I need you to do me a favor tonight," he said, still watching the road. "Okay," I replied, already bracing, though I wasn't sure for what. He took a breath, lips pursing like he was about to deliver constructive feedback in a performance review. "Just try not to embarrass me, all right? These people are way above your level. They're not going to care about soil or emissions or whatever it is you do. Just smile, be polite, and let me handle the conversations." There it was, above your level. I stared at him. Above my level? I repeated carefully. He winced at my tone, but didn't take it back. You know what I mean. These are serious people with serious money and connections. I just don't want you to, I don't know, go into too much detail about your work or your background. It doesn't really fit this crowd. My background, I said. You mean the part where my parents don't summer in Italy? He sighed, annoyed I'd made it about class, when that was exactly what he'd done. Can you not twist my words right now, Sloane? I'm already stressed. This is a big night. I turned my face toward the window and watched the city thin into expensive suburbs. I could see our reflection in the glass, his jaw tight, my shoulders rigid. Here's what Brandon didn't know. 3 weeks earlier, Graham Whitaker had called me. His family office was looking to pivot more seriously into sustainable investing, and someone in his circle had recommended me. We'd had 2 long calls and a video meeting where he'd grilled me on carbon markets and greenwashing risks, then chuckled and said, "You're exactly what we need." At the end of that call, he'd said, "We're hosting a small dinner soon. I'd like you to come. It'll be a good chance to talk in person, and I'd love to introduce you to a few friends who are behind in this area." He'd paused, then added, "Bring someone if you'd like. Partner, friend. It's casual." I'd mentioned, casually, that my boyfriend had been excited about possibly meeting him at some event someday. Graham had laughed. "Well then, it'll be nice to put a face to the name. I'll have Elise add him to the list." I hadn't told Brandon any of this, not because I was trying to teach him a lesson or set up some dramatic reveal. Honestly, I just didn't like talking about projects before contracts were signed, and Brandon had never cared about the details. When I started explaining the Whitaker call, he'd glanced at his phone halfway through, said, "That's cool," and changed the subject. So I stopped sharing. We pulled up to the Whitaker estate at 6:45 p.m. It was excessive. A sweeping drive lined with trees that had probably been shipped in full-grown. Manicured lawns. A house that technically qualified as a home, but looked more like a boutique hotel. Valet took the car. Brandon checked his reflection one more time in the window, smoothed his hair, straightened his tie. He turned to me. "Remember what I said, okay? Just follow my lead." I didn't trust myself to answer, so I just stared at him until he looked away. A server opened the front door and led us through a gleaming foyer, past a curved staircase and out onto a wide terrace overlooking the grounds. Strings of lights were woven through the trees. About 30 people milled around with drinks that probably cost more than my shoes. I scanned the crowd automatically, not for status, but for familiarity. I spotted Graham near the bar, talking to a small cluster of people. Even from across the terrace, he had the relaxed posture of a man used to being the center of attention. Brandon straightened beside me, his networking smile sliding into place. He adjusted his grip on my waist like I was an accessory. "Okay," he murmured. "When we go over, let me—" Graham's eyes found mine. His whole face lit up. He excused himself mid-sentence from his group and strode straight toward us. Beside me, I felt Brandon inhale, readying his polite, polished greeting. "Mr. Whitaker," Brandon began, extending his hand. "Thank you so much for—" Graham walked right past his outstretched hand and grabbed mine instead. "Sloane," he said warmly, shaking my hand with both of his. "Finally. We've been waiting to meet you in person." I watched Brandon's hand remain suspended in the air for a beat before he slowly dropped it to his side. "It's good to finally meet you too," I said, managing a calm smile. "Thank you for inviting us." "Are you kidding?" Graham said. "Having you here is the entire point of tonight." He chuckled. "Well, one of the points. Elise has been talking about your proposal non-stop." Only then did his gaze flick to Brandon. "You must be Brandon," he said. "Sloane mentioned you might be joining us. Glad you could make it." Brandon swallowed. His carefully prepared speech had nowhere to go. Thank you for having us," he managed. Graham clapped him once on the shoulder, friendly but distracted, then turned back to me. "Come on," he said. "Let me introduce you to Elise and a few others who are desperate to corner you about carbon offsets before dinner." He said it loud enough that people nearby turned to look at me with sudden interest. I glanced sideways at Brandon. His face had gone a shade paler, his jaw tight. The expression said everything. He had walked into this house believing he was the one being evaluated, the one on trial, and suddenly realized he was just +1. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. Graham led us to a small group where Elise Whitaker, a graceful woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a generous smile, greeted me like an old friend. So you're the woman trying to drag my husband into the 21st century, she said. I've been reading your proposal. It's infuriatingly persuasive. We all laughed, and just like that, the evening shifted. People introduced themselves to me first. A woman named Monica Lane, who ran an investment fund, asked if I was taking new clients. A man named Noah, who owned a green energy company, monopolized me for 10 minutes about supply chain audits. Elise peppered me with questions about greenwashing and reputational risk. Every time someone said Sloan across the terrace, Brandon flinched a little. He hovered close, laughing too loudly at my jokes, touching my arm whenever another man spent more than a minute talking to me, agreeing emphatically with points I made that he absolutely did not understand. 2 hours earlier, I'd been beneath this crowd. Now I was the reason they were here. During dinner, an elegant sit-down affair with place cards and more forks than I knew what to do with, I ended up seated between Elise and Noah. Brandon sat 4 spots down, next to a woman who worked in insurance and seemed more interested in her phone than the conversation. I could feel his eyes on me every few minutes, trying to catch snippets of what I was saying. Halfway through dessert, Graham stood and tapped his glass. "Thank you all for coming," he said, voice carrying easily. "As some of you know, Elise and I are shifting how we think about our investments, taking sustainability and long-term impact more seriously. We've been fortunate enough to connect with Sloan Mercer," he nodded toward me, "who many of you have had the pleasure of speaking with tonight. She'll be guiding us through this transition, and I suspect some of you may be calling her after this evening." Polite laughter, scattered clapping. A few people turned to study me, like a product just featured in a commercial. I felt my cheeks heat, but I kept my expression composed. Across the table, Brandon looked like he might be sick. Later, when we said our goodbyes, Graham pulled me aside near the door. "Let's get something on the books for next week," he said. "I'd like to finalize terms and loop in a few partners." "Absolutely," I said. "I'll have my assistant send some times." He smiled. "And bring Brandon to dinner sometime. Just the 4 of us. I think Elise would enjoy getting to know him properly." I glanced toward the entryway where Brandon stood, shoulders pulled in, watching us with a mixture of anxiety and confusion. "Sure," I said. That sounds nice." The drive home was silent for the first 15 minutes. The quiet between us wasn't comfortable or neutral. It was the brittle kind, all sharp edges and unsaid things. Finally, Brandon spoke, his voice tight. "Why didn't you tell me you knew Graham Whitaker?" I watched the headlights streak along the dark road ahead of us. "You never asked about my work," I said softly. "That's not fair," he snapped. "You specifically didn't tell me about this, about—" He gestured vaguely. "About all of that." "I didn't tell you because the project isn't finalized yet, and I don't like talking about things before they're real," I said. "And because every time I try to explain what I do, you change the subject." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry about what I said earlier," he muttered. "In the car, I was nervous." "It didn't sound nervous," I replied. "It sounded honest." I didn't mean it like that." "You told me those people were above my level," I said, keeping my tone even. "You told me not to embarrass you. Those aren't words that slip out by accident, Brandon. They come from somewhere." He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I was just stressed," he insisted. "You know how important nights like this are for my career. And you assumed my career was less important, less impressive? That I was just some girl who talks about dirt, who you had to manage. That's not what I think." "It is," I said quietly. "It's what you've always thought. Every time you introduce me as Sloan, she does environmental stuff, and move on. Every time you pick out what I should wear so I don't stand out. You've been managing me like I'm a liability." He exhaled sharply, the sound halfway between a scoff and a sob. "You're blowing this out of proportion." I turned back to the window, watching our reflections flicker in and out of view as streetlights passed overhead. I didn't say anything else. I just stared at the darkness and listened to the sound of my own heartbeat, realizing that something between us had quietly, permanently shifted. I didn't break up with him that night, but I knew with a bone-deep certainty that whatever we'd had before that car ride was gone. For a while after the Whitakers' dinner, Brandon acted like nothing had happened. If anything, he seemed lighter, almost giddy. The next morning, he made coffee in my kitchen like he always did, humming as if we hadn't had a conversation in the car that split my view of him in half. He handed me a mug, kissed my forehead, and said, "You were incredible last night." I stared at him over the rim. "Thanks," I said. He took a sip of his own coffee, leaning against the counter. "I mean it, Sloan. I don't know. You just fit in. Everyone wanted to talk to you. Graham clearly thinks you're a big deal." "Do you?" I asked. He blinked. "Do I what?" "Think I'm a big deal." He laughed, a little too quickly. Of course I do. Don't be weird. He slid his phone out of his pocket and began scrolling. The conversation evaporated like steam. That became the pattern for the next week. Brandon saying the right words on the surface, and me feeling the hollowness underneath. What changed, really, wasn't how he treated me when we were alone. It was how the rest of his world suddenly started treating me. By Monday afternoon, my LinkedIn looked like it had been hit by a minor storm. Connection request. Brandon's coworker. Another request. Someone from his extended network I vaguely recognized from a rooftop mixer months ago. A friend of his boss. A woman who once gave me a tight smile and turned her back when I tried to join a conversation. Now they all wanted to connect. I clicked through a few profiles. Communications director, investor relations, strategic partnerships. Different titles, same hungry eyes in their profile photos. Brandon texted me between meetings. You're blowing up, he wrote, followed by 3 rocket emojis. Everyone's talking about how you had Graham's attention the whole night. I stared at the message for a while before responding. I thought they were above my level. He didn't reply to that part. Instead, later, when we were on the phone, he said, "You should add them. You never know where it leads." At the end of the week, there was a happy hour with his team at a trendy bar downtown. In the past, I'd gone and spent most of the evening stirring my drink, while people talked around me about campaigns and clients I'd never heard of. This time, I felt eyes tracking me as soon as we walked in. Brandon had his arm around my waist, holding me a little tighter than usual, like I was something fragile or valuable, or both. "Sloane's here," I heard someone murmur. A woman in a green blazer, Amelia, I remembered, made a beeline over. The last time I'd seen her, she'd nodded in my direction and then turned back to her conversation about some award ceremony. "Sloane, hi," she said now, smiling like we were old friends. "Brandon told us about the Whitaker dinner. You're working with them?" Brandon's hand tightened around my waist, pride flaring in his expression. "Yeah," he said before I could answer. "Graham basically built the night around her. He's bringing her in to overhaul their entire sustainability strategy." Amelia's eyes widened. "Wow, that's huge. Are you taking on more clients?" Her tone was casual, but I could see the calculation there. She held a cocktail in one hand like a prop, body angled toward me, leaving Brandon just slightly outside the circle. I gave her a polite smile. "Possibly," I said. "Depends on the fit." People who had barely acknowledged me at previous events drifted over as the evening wore on. They asked about ESG metrics and carbon offsets in the same breath they used to reserve for gossip about promotions and brand deals. It should have felt validating. Instead, it made my skin crawl, because the before and after was too stark. Same face, same resume, same work. The only variable that had changed was that someone they respected had publicly stamped me as important. Brandon seemed to love it. "This is what I've been telling you," he said later that night when we were back at his place, as if the last year and a half had been one long sales pitch. "You're underselling yourself. You should use these connections." "Funny," I said, taking off my earrings in his bathroom mirror. "A couple weeks ago you told me not to talk about my work at all." He appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. "I told you I was stressed," he said. "Can we not keep relitigating that?" I apologized. "Right," I said softly. "You did." He stepped behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. Our eyes met in the mirror. "You were incredible," he repeated. "I'm proud of you." His voice was warm. His grip was possessive. For a second, I tried to let those words soak in, to pretend that this was what I'd wanted all along. His pride, his admiration, his willingness to say out loud that I was impressive. But the memory of his voice in the car kept replaying underneath it, a quieter audio track. "Try not to embarrass me. They're above your level. Don't talk about your background." Pride that arrives only after public validation isn't pride. It's opportunism in nicer clothes. 2 weeks after the Whitaker dinner, Brandon came over to my apartment with takeout and a familiar kind of excitement in his eyes. "I have news," he announced, setting the bags on the counter. "Good news, or I volunteered us for something news?" I asked, easing off my shoes. "Good for you, good for me, good for everyone," he said, ignoring the warning in my tone. "There's a sustainability and innovation conference next month. Huge event. Graham is doing a keynote. Guess who just got us tickets?" I opened the fridge, staring at the shelves, even though I wasn't getting anything. "You got tickets?" Well, technically my company did, he said, but I told my boss we should definitely go. It's perfect. You'll be there in case Graham wants to introduce you to more people, and I'll get to be in the room with half the people I've been trying to meet for years. He was so transparent he might as well have been glass. I wasn't planning on going to that conference, I said. His smile faltered. What? Why not? Because I'm not presenting, I said, and I already have meetings with Graham and his team booked that week. I don't need to sit in a crowded ballroom to hear him give the polished version of what I already read in his brief. Brandon stared at me like I'd just admitted I didn't believe in Wi-Fi. Are you serious right now? This is a huge opportunity for both of us. Is it? I asked, turning to face him fully. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like an opportunity for you to walk me around like a credential. That's not fair, he said, bristling. I'm trying to support you. I want people to see how brilliant you are. You wanted those same people to not know I existed 2 weeks ago, I reminded him. You told me I was going to embarrass you, that they were above my level. Brandon, which version of me are we bringing to this conference? The liability or the golden ticket? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration leaking into his voice. Why are you being like this? I said I was sorry. I've been asking about your work, trying to understand it more. I've been introducing you differently. I've noticed, I said. You went from she does environmental stuff to she works with major funds like the Whitakers in record time. Isn't that what you wanted? He demanded. For me to appreciate what you do? Yes, I said. I wanted you to appreciate what I do, not who I know. There's a difference. He grabbed one of the takeout containers and ripped it open, even though we hadn't set the table yet. I can't win with you, he muttered. I try to be proud of you, and you twist it into some kind of insult. I watched him for a moment, the way his jaw clenched, the way he stabbed his fork into the noodles like they'd personally wronged him. Brandon, I said quietly, be honest. If Graham hadn't praised me in front of all those people, if the Whitaker dinner had been just a nice night with good food, would anything about the way you talk about me have changed? He looked up sharply. Of course it would have, he said. You're making this a test. Like I have to give the right answer, or I fail you. It's not a test, I said. It's a pattern. You were embarrassed by me when you thought I was harmless background noise. You're proud of me now because I turned out to be useful. That's not true, he said, voice rising. I've always respected you. Respect doesn't sound like try not to embarrass me, I said. It doesn't tell someone to hide their background because it doesn't fit the crowd. It doesn't manage their clothes and their conversation topics so they don't mess up your big night. His chest rose and fell quickly. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the version of me standing in front of him. You're holding a grudge, he said finally. You're punishing me for one bad moment. No, I said. I'm finally listening to it. He shook his head, laughing once in disbelief. Unbelievable. We ate in near silence after that, the clink of forks and the hum of the fridge filling the room, where easy conversation used to live. At one point, he tried again. Look, he said softer. I messed up. I was scared that night. I've worked my whole life to get into rooms like that. I didn't want anything to go wrong. That doesn't mean I don't respect you. I held his gaze. Then why did you only start acting like you respect me after everyone else did? He didn't have an answer for that. He just looked away. Later, after he left, I sat alone at my small kitchen table, staring at the half-empty takeout containers and his lingering fingerprints on my glass. In the span of 3 weeks, I'd gone from wondering whether he secretly thought I was beneath him to knowing exactly how conditional his respect really was. And once you see that line, where someone's admiration starts and ends, it's almost impossible to unsee it. Before the Whitaker dinner, the idea of breaking up with Brandon felt dramatic, unnecessary, like burning down a house just because one window was cracked. After the dinner, the cracks weren't cracks anymore. They were fault lines. And 3 weeks later, the house finally collapsed. But the truth, the breakup didn't start with a fight. It started with silence. A long, slow, suffocating silence that settled into the space between us like fog. It lived in the pauses between texts, in the way our conversations felt like PR statements instead of real thoughts, in how careful we both became, him not wanting to say the wrong thing, me refusing to pretend nothing had changed. One night we were making dinner at my place, pasta, something simple, when he said, too casually, Graham mentioned grabbing coffee next month. Maybe we could all go together? I didn't even look up from the cutting board. Why would I bring you to that meeting? He froze, a piece of broccoli half cut under his knife. So I can meet him, he said. Build rapport. He's a huge connection, Sloan. That's exactly the problem. What does that mean? It means you're not trying to understand my work, I said. You're trying to network through me. His jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. Is it? Every time you mention Graham now, you're talking about your opportunities. Not mine, not our relationship, just your access. He dropped the knife with a sharp clatter. Do you hear yourself right now? I'm trying to support you. No, I said, finally meeting his eyes. You're trying to leverage me. His face flushed. Why are you being so hostile lately? I said I was sorry. I've done everything you asked. I started asking about your work. I brag about you to my team now. I don't want you to brag about me, I said. I wanted you to respect me, before the Whitakers made it fashionable. That hit him. I saw the words land like a blow. He turned away, bracing his hands on the counter. So what? He said quietly. You're never going to forgive me? One mistake and I'm the villain forever? It wasn't one mistake, I said. It was the truth you let slip. And once someone tells you what they really think, you can't pretend you didn't hear it. He spun back toward me. So what, you're ending this? I don't know, I said honestly, but I don't recognize the version of us that exists now. He stared at me for several long seconds, breathing hard, and then the anger drained from his face. He looked scared. Sloan, he said, voice breaking. Please don't throw this away. I love you. My throat tightened. I believed he meant it, but I also knew love wasn't the issue anymore. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, habit, and I could see the notification reflected in the glass backsplash behind him. It was from someone he worked with. A message preview. Did you get her to introduce you yet? Brandon went still. Slowly I said, introduce you to who? He locked the phone. Too fast. Nobody. It's not just work stuff. Let me see it. No. That one word, sharp, defensive, was the final confirmation I didn't want, but already suspected. He'd been planning it, coaching his colleagues behind the scenes, positioning me like a stepping stone he just needed permission to walk across. My stomach went cold. Brandon, I said quietly, I can't do this. His face crumpled. Sloan, please don't do this. I was stupid, okay? I shouldn't have said what I said in the car. I swear I've changed. I'm trying. But it was too late for trying. Something had snapped inside me, not from anger, but from clarity. You didn't suddenly respect me, I said. You just realized other people did, and you adjusted. That's not growth. That's opportunism. He stepped toward me, reaching. Sloan, don't go. Don't end this. I backed away. No, this already ended. We're just finally saying it out loud. He stared at me, breathing hard, hands trembling like he wasn't sure what to hold on to. And then very softly he said, You'll regret this. But the only thing I regretted was not seeing it sooner. That night, I packed the sweater he kept at my place and left it in a neat folded stack by the door. He texted me twice, long paragraphs turning into frantic half-sentences, but I didn't answer. The next morning, I woke up alone. And for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. A month after the breakup, my life looked completely different. The Whitaker project didn't just go well, it exploded. Graham introduced me to 3 other funds, 2 CEOs, and 1 nonprofit director who practically begged me to take them on. I hired an assistant, moved into an office that didn't smell like old carpet, and upgraded my laptop for the first time in years. My calendar stopped having blank spaces. My bank account finally looked like it belonged to an expert in her field. But the biggest shift wasn't professional. It was personal. I met Eli Turner at a community sustainability workshop Graham's wife had asked me to visit. Eli was a middle school science teacher. Funny, curious, a little awkward, and the first man in years who didn't look past me while talking. He loved every messy, nerdy corner of my job, asked follow-up questions, lit up when I explained things. Our first date lasted 4 hours. Our second lasted 6. And he introduced me to his friends like this. This is Sloan. She's amazing. Not, this is Sloan. She works with important people. Just amazing, as a human, as herself. I didn't realize how starved I'd been for that. 6 weeks after the breakup, I ran into Brandon. It was at a professional mixer downtown. He was with a woman in a red dress who looked exactly like someone who would appear on his company's branding materials. Sleek, confident, polished. He saw me from across the room. His face shifted. Surprise, then embarrassment, then something I didn't have a name for. Something like longing. I gave him a polite nod and turned back to my conversation with Eli, who was animatedly describing the chaos of his 8th grade science fair. That night at 11:46 p.m., Brandon texted me. It was good to see you. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I really did learn from what happened between us. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate you when I had the chance. I stared at the message for a long moment, and then I put my phone down and went to sleep. No reply, no second thoughts. Some lessons don't need discussion. They just need closure. 2 weeks later, I was having lunch with Graham at a restaurant near his office when he asked, almost casually, "How's Brandon doing? Haven't seen him around." "We broke up," I said. Graham nodded once, unsurprised. "Elise didn't think he was right for you," he said. "She said he seemed more interested in who you knew than who you were." I sat with that for a moment. It was strangely comforting to know someone else had seen it too, long before I dared to. We finished lunch. Talked next steps. Signed contracts. Moved forward with a future I never would have had if Brandon hadn't said the quiet part out loud that night in the car. Funny how clarity arrives. Sometimes like a whisper. Sometimes like a wrecking ball. And sometimes like a man you love saying, "Try not to embarrass me," right before the world proves him catastrophically wrong. I'm grateful I learned the difference between conditional respect and real respect at 34, not 44 or 54 or too late. And I'm even more grateful that the person who underestimated me the most is just a footnote in a story that turned out bigger, softer, and brighter than anything I expected.